Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge again today. We have Adam Rowe with us here from Zero Labs. So, welcome to the show, Adam.
Hey Gary, hey Casper.
Hi, Adam. Hi.
So, Casper's quite familiar with Adam, unlike myself. So, I'm going to pass over to him and he can get us going.
Right. Well, I'll try to. Thank you, Gary.
All right.
Hey again, Adam. Thank
Hey.
you for joining us. Very good of you to make time in your busy schedule. So yeah, as Gary said, Adam Rowe, based out on the West Coast in the States, and I'm really pleased we've got Adam here. I've had some to and fro with Adam myself in the past because I was very intrigued about his latest company, as Gary said, a company called Zero Labs. But rather than me banging on about that and what I think it is, and about Adam, why don't I turn this over to Adam for a moment? Adam, if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself and give our audience a sense of who you are and maybe touch briefly on, I know you've just done a 5-minute pitch, so maybe you can do a 2-second pitch on what Zero Labs is, and then we
Sure.
can fall into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Adam Rowe. I'm the CEO and founder of Zero Labs. We're a product design and engineering company based out of Los Angeles, California. We're, I would say, just down the road from SpaceX, if that gives you any kind of geographical reference. We've been around for about 7 years and officially been open for sales probably since 2020. So we've gone through a lot of evolutions, especially during COVID, but we're real excited about where we are.
And Adam, what would people coming to the company as a potential purchaser or somebody who's just looking at the beautiful creations that you have, do you think they would immediately see you just as a sort of a premium classic reinvigorating company that works with beautiful old vehicles? Is there a reason why you're much more than that? Because visually, that's the thing that the stunning attractiveness that got my attention originally.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the hardest parts I think about the industry itself is that it has no precedent, right? So when you think about social media, you can point at Facebook, you can point at Instagram, or Twitter. When you think about modern electric cars, you can point at Tesla. But when you think about classic vehicles, they're really, especially the electrified version, there really is no precedent. And so a lot of our job at Zero is to not just produce amazing, beautiful recreations of the classic vehicles, but to support the industry itself. It's trying to grow behind this. And I think one of the reasons the industry hasn't scaled is because of technological limitations, because of availability and performance. And so while we are definitely developing arguably some of the best classic electric vehicles in the world, we also have to improve, what is essentially 60 years of engineering that has changed since then. And while in addition to making it electric, it also has to be a better version of the car, even if it were gas-based. So there's educating the general public about what that means. That's also educating the value of it to investor market, to partner markets. But it is inevitable. Like there are 1.4 billion cars in the world, and 99.95% of them are gas based. So we either have a choice: we can sweep all of them into a landfill and hope that new cars will take care of it. But I think that's a terrible way of helping the environment, is to put a billion cars into a landfill and say, we're doing the right thing for the environment. We're also sweeping away a major part of our own personal history. And MP3s did not wipe out all the songs that came before it any more than downloadable or streaming videos got rid of every movie made in the 80s and 90s. Electrification of classic vehicles will not end. We don't need, just because we want to say we want to do electric doesn't mean we have to end everything that happened before it. So our job at Zero is to basically digitize the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a lot of people coming to this area might think of classic electric vehicles as being very much one-offs. So very wealthy people bringing in single cars that they've fallen in love with and saying, I want this to be a usable car in the next 5, 10 years, 2 years, whatever it might be. Can you deal with this for me? But actually, from what I understand of your company, of course, you can take us further on this aspect of it. But from what I understand, you're very much looking at the more modular aspect of that, i.e., coming back to your point about the landfill side of things, making this available over time, maybe immediately, but certainly over time, to other vehicles and a series of vehicles and a host of vehicles, to mean that this is possible to do at scale. Is that really where you're headed, and are you already pretty much there?
That's definitely where we're headed. One of the other thing that's really kept the industry from scaling, in addition to sort of the prior technological limitations, is the idea of repeatability. If we could certainly make a career off just doing one-offs, and there's no shortage of those. We have Ferraris, and we have really rare, military vehicles for a king, and things like that. We've had Russian fire trucks to be offered, but what's the value of doing one of them? Yeah. The other thing about it is that most people would give up maybe a little bit of customization to get it more affordable and to get it faster. Yeah. And the problem with the old techniques is that it takes a very, very, very long time, and it's quite expensive. And you really don't benefit from any economies of scale when you're trying to make everything into a special snowflake. So our model really is going to be removing the customization components and really sticking to the models that people care about the most, making our platform and our conversion technology as quality as it possibly can be compared to a modern car, but also making it more affordable. And the only way to do that is to do it at scale.
Yeah. And do you think that there will be two things running parallel there? That there will be the absolute customizable side of it, where people still will bring in things that are close to their heart, and they've got enough money to throw at it that it's like, well, we'll occasionally do those one-offs, and at the same time in tandem be running these that become more and more modular to speed up the process? Or do you think actually the really heavy custom stuff will actually ultimately fall away for you guys?
I think one feeds the other. And so when you have a vehicle you've never done before, the first question we ask is, how dissimilar is this from something we've already done? And how much like something that we want to do is this? And so what we should decide to do, the projects we take on now, if we've never done one before, we decide to take the project on, it's because we think that there's enough of these in the world that if we solve this problem, that others will also want this solved for them. So right now we're doing about 7 different models, or makes and models, and 3 of them are already in production, meaning we're doing like multiples of them. The others are really first articles of what will become a production model. And so that way we're saying like, yeah, this is the first one of those we've done. There's a lot of exploration and really heavily considered engineering and design. But the intention of this is, once we get those done, now we can offer this to the industry that is very much behind that model existing in the future. Where if we did that with a car that very few people have, as beautiful as it is, there's no forward value in that, Can
I ask, Adam, so what you're really doing, you're just converting older vehicles into new technology, as opposed to designing brand new cars?
Well, we're not designing brand new cars. We're not an OEM. That's not to say one day we might decide to create our own car, but because there's certainly a lot of lessons learned on what are we doing really well, and could there be a vehicle that could come from that? But there's also, you need billions of dollars, and I also think that there's no shortage of very well intended, very well funded OEMs all attempting to do this. That would be equivalent to me saying I'm going to create a blockbuster film. As an independent filmmaker, you're not going to do that. But I think what we can do is do the best job with the vehicles we care about. OEMs are very focused on tomorrow. They're focused on competing with Tesla. They're focused on making those cars as cheap as possible. They don't really have the financial means or the manufacturing ability to address their back catalog. But to us, that is the most important thing, because that's where all the sentiment lives. It's where all the value lives. People aren't in love with the future. They're in love with the things that they grew up with. And so we want to address that. but it's not just an electrification, because that would be like putting a rocket on a tricycle. The steering, the brakes, the balance would all be completely wrong for that modern architecture. So, and we tried that. We did that as good as anybody. All of our early versions, our Gen 1s, were all what basically the best versions of what people are now just starting to do. But we recognize that you're not going to get those cars to go 75 miles an hour. The range is cut in half because you've got all this mechanical components like transmissions and transfer cases and differentials and, all these components that don't need to be there for an electric car. And we can do better. If we're going to make this work for scale, it's not going to be that. It's going to be something different. And so that's what our platform is for ours. It gets rid of all the problems with balance, steering, modularity, performance, and even ease of assembly. Like in the current versions, people have to get to know, you have to become an electrical engineer, software engineer, mechanical engineer. You have to have a lot of sourcing, time it perfectly. And people are pretty terrified by that. People don't want to electrify themselves. They don't want to do it wrong. And with ours, you don't ever touch a high voltage wire. Assembly is really a mating of the old and new. And for our full vehicles, we do re-architect the bodies. We make them stronger and better and fix a lot of the problems that weren't possible to fix back in the old days.
Adam, just to touch on the area of the business itself, obviously people coming to Tesla or thinking about Tesla now may think cars, but they may also think tech. They may have a whole host of ideas that they have about what that company actually is or ultimately might be, whether that be based on the battery technology, for example. How do you envisage or see Zero Labs at the moment, and how do you see it becoming as a business going forward?
Right now, we're working very hard to prove the category. I think that there's no shortage of customer interest. We have essentially 100 years worth of order requests now, but that doesn't really help us if we can't make them. And so what we're really focused on is scale, but the only way to achieve scale is you need infrastructure support. So it's not like Steve Jobs made one iPhone and sold it and used the proceeds to make number 2 and number 5. It's the other way around. You built the infrastructure to support the scale. And what our industry needs is precisely that. We need to get the investment community to recognize that this is a major category that is trying to come through and will become unstoppable, but it's not going to happen by doing these kind of like one-off Etsy style cars that are just like, one-off, lucky if you did them, versions. It's going to become from investing into scale, getting our costs down, owning your supply chains, because that's what the market needs. It's ready for that. But it's so a lot of our job really is to help prove that. But the long term of it is we want to be this, we want to support the industry that does not want to have to learn all those types of engineerings and physics and, battery chemistry and programming and software. And instead say, I just want to do what I really love, but I also want to make it electric. And so we're not just repurposing electric vehicles, our plan is to also repurpose the industry that is making the gas, or supporting the gas vehicles themselves, because they're very aware that their days are numbered.
Yeah. Now, in terms of money, can I just quickly ask, Gary, you might have another question, but in terms of actually the investment, now, traditionally, I have a very limited background in private equity and in raising funds, but what you tend to hear is all this stuff around EBITDA, certain profit ratios and so on over a certain period. Now, when you're heavily investing in brand new tech, new people, expensive people and so on, the ability to go to those sort of guys and get them to part with any money is, in my mind at least, pretty much zero. So where do you see, sorry to use the word zero, where do you see the funding coming to allow you to scale? Is that part of the education piece here, or is there an even bigger game afoot around how we can actually get money into companies like yours that are exciting, that create beautiful stuff, but need investment?
Well, what we've learned from the recent public offerings, I think there was something like 47 electric vehicle companies went public globally using SPACs. what we've learned from that is that you're not going to trick the market into thinking that you're just very well intended, and then suddenly you're going to get the funding to actually execute against what you say. You have to do some of the work before that. Right. And I think that a lot of the companies that were funded and went public had never produced a single car, don't even have a roller, and have never done anything. So not surprisingly, the lucky ones were able to at least produce one or two cars. Most of them were put out of business before they even got that far. So we've taken a very deliberate approach with Zero Labs, which is to not just produce demo cars and say, there, look, we've delivered customer cars. Like right now, for the last year and a half, customers have been driving these things around. And that's unheard of in the OEM world, with very few exceptions. Rivian and maybe Lucid are really the only ones who've delivered cars. The rest of them are still caught in pretend land, Faraday Future and Fisker and a lot of these really well-funded startups still haven't delivered a single car. And they're very, very Lordstown, a lot of these are gone, but we have to overcome that bias and say, find the companies who are actually doing this and just need scale. Don't fund the companies who are talking about hypothetical, hydrogen passenger drones, which is like, 30 years away. Instead, focus like they're already doing it. They need scale. But so it's going to have to be overcoming that bias and proving that they're already doing it. Those are the ones you want to back, and they're out there, but they're just not as many.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Did you want to ask something? Because I've got a couple of things lined up. But if there's something that comes from you, it will come from somebody who's less familiar with this area, and I think that would be really helpful.
It's just more the process in the conversion. In like I said, must be a lot of difference if you've got like a classic car, or more modern, something like I own that's maybe 10, 12 years old, and then a supercar, because like you say, some are already built for high speed, and then there's other ones that were never meant to go 70, 80 miles an hour. Are you having to change a lot of things on these cars, or is it something like 10 years old, a lot easier, a lot more straightforward?
So we generally, we have kind of what I would say is an algorithm. We want to find the cars that there's a lot of. We want to find the cars there's a lot of and people value them. And then we want to find the ones that are easy to work with and are very modular in some ways. And so, for example, when we get asked questions like, can you do my 2018 Honda Odyssey? No, because that car would cost $7,000. And why would we spend all this time and engineering money to develop a car that is already a fraction of the value of the conversion? You want to find the ones that are already like that in the market and say, look, people are already spending, $200,000 on Broncos and Land Rovers and old classic pickup trucks and Mustangs and muscle cars. That's a good starting point. But you also don't want to do a car that there's none of. Like, I love the Mercedes 300 SLs, but they made 2,000 of them. Yeah. And you'd be out of your mind to convert that because it's $1 million starting price. And even if you could do that, how many are you going to really do? Whereas like the 190 SLs, they made like 23,000 of those. That's better, So we like 70s and 80s. 60s are okay too, but you don't want to get up to like the 2000s and beyond that, because they're really not worth very much. And the prices of conversion does not create value for an electric version of more modern cars. So we generally look at what we would call as classic cars. Classic car is typically viewed as anything that's about 21 years or older. Those typically have more value. That's not to say that because every year 2 million more cars become technically classic. So 10 years from now could be that a early 2000s car is technically classic. But you also want to make sure it's not like a bunch of plastic and cheap, and because those are hard to reproduce.
So
we're not going to create.
Skoda Fabias then, right?
Yeah,
they're destined for the scrap meet. Never mind.
There
I
might
still
be a
like.
different company working on them, Gary.
Yes, that's it.
Actually, that does bring me on to the point I was going to raise. In terms of this thing where you touch on the area of a whole load of cars being scrapped, where do you see Zero Labs as being able to make a real dent in that, or are you trying to raise awareness enough around that and say there needs to be a concerted effort across a host of different companies who are involved in making the cars electric, who could all take a little different slice of that pie?
We're definitely trying to build not just a car or even a product. We're trying to support an entire ecosystem of what do we do with the old cars. Yeah. And that can come down to everything from recycling the interior components to giving a longer life to something that might not be ready, that in its current form won't last very long, but we can give it another life that is 10, 20 years longer than the one it is. A lot of the cars we're making now are designed to be upgradable. And so the batteries come out, the MCUs and VCUs are replaceable. And so we can replace the parts we know are going to change over the next 10 years and keep the parts that are good and will last for a lot longer. But if we can give another life to these things, why would we not do that? But it also has to be worth it. Like we joke about the cars that we know we'll never do, but we constantly get requests for those cars. And like, you're like, oh, I guess to some people that's important. So once that price comes lower, then it makes sense. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you have to take on the entire supply chain approach. How we make batteries for these cars, how we make motors for these cars, what do we do with the old parts? All of that has to be integrated. And I think that's where our partnerships are going to come in the future, is utilizing recycled components that are not just from an environmental perspective, but also just why would you throw that away? Why would you could use that again? And so there's that whole idea, but yeah, you're not going to keep everything. The other thing I would say, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
The other thing that's not being said right now about the modern cars, the OEMs, is that before electric vehicles really hit mass market, the average life of a car was considered to be about 12.1 years was the average. New electric vehicles, it's not going to be that. And the reason is because a battery is expected to last, where before it loses a lot of its voltage, but like what's called voltage fade, or about 80% of its original voltage, is about 8 to 10 years. More likely about 8 years. You're sort of limited by the number of duty cycles that the electric battery can handle. And so if the battery then is not removable, then the car itself's longevity is dictated to by the length of the battery.
Yeah.
And the battery lasts 8 to 10 years, which means that the life cycle of these modern electric cars is actually shorter by about 30% than that of a combustion vehicle. So that's kind of frightening because it's not being talked about. But that's not to say all the parts in there couldn't be recycled in some way. But the life cycle of those cars is shorter than it would be from the combustion counterpart. So what we're trying to do is have the cars that have been around for a while last even longer than that. Making the batteries replaceable and upgradable not only gives people peace of mind that the investment in this car will be worth it over time. You never have to worry about what if in the future there's a 500-mile battery? There most definitely will be. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you have to throw your car away when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you, just to give a sense for the people watching and engaging with this material, when I first saw your stuff, two things really. One, I'd like to touch on the whole design side, because you have a really clean, beautiful look for the Broncos, for the Land Rovers I've seen, for some of the muscle cars. You've got this modular approach and it's all very slick. It all looks great. So I want to come back to that bit about design and how important that is to you and whether that feeds into your background. But just a quick sidebar on the overall cost. Do you think in the end this sort of 300,000, 200,000 territory can come down to being in people's, I suppose the people who are buying Teslas now, for example, spending anywhere from I'll talking dollars for a minute, sort of, I don't know, $60,000 to $120,000, or that sort of space. Do you see that as an area that's achievable for Zero Labs?
Yeah, I think that our long-term goal is to be able to bring down the costs. The one thing that is typically not factored from people when they're looking at the idea of a classic vehicle versus a mass-produced electric vehicle is that those cars are produced by robots using offshore components with tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure to make that possible. It takes $50 billion to make a car you can sell for 35,000, you know. But that's part of it. The other part of it is that you also have to start with a car that's already worth the equivalent of a new Tesla, you know. So like your starter price for a Land Rover might be 35,000 just to get started. So you're never gonna produce an electric version of that car for the price of the original rusted car. But I think, like, you know, I mean, all of our goals are to bring the overall cost down. I think more likely than producing a whole car for that price would be we would like to produce this a situation where you're conflicted. Do you want to buy a modern electric car, or do you want to electrify the version of something that you already love? And that price should be equal to a new car. So our price targeting is really to get the cost something closer to what a new car would cost.
Yeah. Okay. So that other aspect of what I was wanting to touch on was when I looked at your website, for example, right, it is everything on there. All the cars, they just look so clean. Obviously, there's a lot of design there anyway. There's a design around the tech, the batteries, where everything's positioned, all of these other things that you've spoken about. But there's also, it feels like there's you in there. I'm guessing it's you, Adam, that again, you are buying into something rather special. It feels bespoke. Do you think that you can maintain that? Maybe it's just that in the end, you can maintain that, but then you have a modular offering that involves other dealerships and franchisees and all of those sorts of things, where you push out the stuff that can be retrofitted, and you don't need to work on the car itself. You can just retrofit that. Again, coming back to that sort of two areas, the area where you say, well, actually, we've got the tech that can go into other vehicles now, and there's somebody else out there who can actually do some of that work. And then obviously it would be a real shame to me if you did lose that higher end aspect, which seems to have a lot of you in it. Do you think you can juggle both of those while moving at pace?
Yeah, I mean, to start at the high level, we can't possibly modernize and convert 100 million classic vehicles, but we can support the industry that can. And so we look at the full vehicle's job is to create the potential for what that category could be, what that vehicle could be. And then the byproduct of that is the electrification platform and anything that goes with that, which could also be included as part of the conversion, as part of the retrofit and modernization of that car. It doesn't have to be the full redesigned version. That's just because we need to really explore what's possible. But I think, like, the easy answer to design is that a lot's changed in 50, 60 years. And one of the things that we have to consider is that the way the brain works, that nostalgia is not a longing for the past as people think it is. It's actually a misremembrance of the past. It is a glorified, sanitized version of what we think and thought that this is how things were. But if you actually go back to that time, it wasn't like that at all. You know, you go back and say, oh, I really miss Atari. I really miss, you know, the first Tron movie or something. And you actually watch it like, this is awful. This is terrible. Like, it's really bad. But that's not how you remember it. And so because you've glorified it and sanitized it all these years, you're not going to remember the breakdowns. You're not going to remember the fires, or that you couldn't go 55 miles an hour without speeding out of control. You're going to remember it as more simple, more clean, more idealized. So our job is to give you the idealized version of the past, to clean up the mistakes, to clean up the things that you might not even really remembered, and give you a much more perfect version of that past that is more in alignment with what you would want it to be, and less like all the major defects and flaws, and something special that represents what's possible in that category. That doesn't mean all cars have to be that. But that is our obligation and opportunities to give you that version with our design team. So our full version is supposed to be that. We can't just electrify the version of the past and say there any more than we could digitize a movie from the 80s and go there, we're all done. Because you'd have like NTSC lines or PAL lines, and the synchronization would be off and the quality would be terrible. You have to recreate that. You have to go back and clean it up. And that's what we're doing. We're by digitizing the past, you're also perfecting it.
Yeah. I think that's a very salient point about the way we look back on things through rose-tinted spectacles. I think that is absolutely correct. Final question from me. Gary may have some others, but final question from me. This ecosystem, this wider, all of the various aspects from the battery side all the way through to other design aspects and all of the other parts and suppliers that you might have, and the other aspect of actually other potential sales avenues, not just for Zero Labs, but as a whole. How collegiate is all of this? Are people working together and pulling together in the electric car area, or is there a lot of work to be done on that?
Well, the industry right now is divided between, like, I think to start with the more common component, I think everyone agrees that electrification is our goal. And whether it's a modern car, whether it's a classic car or an existing car, we all know that the old ways cannot continue. That transportation is the number one, or automotive is the largest component of transportation, and transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases of any category, any single category. So there's no avoiding the fact that transportation is the thing to address first, and that of that, automotive is 83% of transportation. So it's 6 times bigger than air, than boat, and then rail combined. So it has to be addressed. The question is, how do we get there? Most electrification is really focused on new cars, and that makes sense. But what they're leaving behind is the vast majority of all the automotive and that's happening. So a lot of the previous electrification industry has been really relegated to the old techniques, or using crashed parts, using leftover parts, using that weird kind of space between now and then parts. And that's really not going to get our volumes up. It's not going to get it safe. It's not going to get it to be widespread as an industry. So our job is to really give the conversion market OEM style, OEM quality components that can be produced at a cost that is where the market wants it to be. But that's just not going to happen by just getting a bunch of sales. It's going to happen by the industry itself recognizing that's actually a bigger market is to address the previous cars, and to think that you're going to convince Ford to buy your motor. You're not going to do that. They have their pick of whoever they want to work with. What you are going to do is address, like, make something approachable for the existing market industry and see them as your partners, because this is coming. And once the scale hits, it'll be as big, if not bigger, than the new car industry itself.
Right. Okay. Lovely. Gary, was there anything? I know we're right at the end. Was there any final?
Yeah, no, we're getting close to that time again, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's been really interesting because I came to this as a newbie. I didn't know anything about what Adam did, and he's explained it very well. And I think it's a great idea, and I'd be interested to see how this grows for you going forward. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. This can't be stopped. This is going to happen. It is happening right now. The question is, how long will the industry go before it gets the support it needs? Because there are a lot of OEM level startups now who are trying to make this happen at scale. And all of us have multi-year backlogs of order requests, but we don't have the infrastructure to support the demand. And you don't need to sell millions of cars to become profitable. In fact, it's the other way around. Ferrari has proven that Ferrari has, for every one Ferrari sold, it has the profits of 908 Fords. And I would much rather sell one Ferrari than 908 Ford. That's no ding on Ford. Rather, the likelihood of you selling that many cars competing with mass OEMs is an absurd concept. Yeah. Why would you want to do that? Better to do more with less, and have a better company that is more effective at its profitability and sales, by not requiring that scale to break even. Yeah. And that's what this category offers.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Adam. That was really good. I mean, it's an area that I love anyway, particularly the whole thing of just cars and transport generally. And I've always been enthused by Zero Labs. I think you've done something incredible, and taking this first step is an amazing thing. So I hope that you might consider coming back and talking to us again at some time.
Of course.
But for now, thank you very much for joining us at Quantum Bridge. And I'm going to say farewell.
Yeah, thank you, Caspar. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Look forward to talking to you both soon.